Hello, hello, and happy Wednesday. I'm still feeling pretty tired from our move, and so this week I'm in the mood to keep it pretty simple and just work on something that's going to help me bring a little bit more Zen into my life. And so I'm going to work on a geologic abstract. As I often do to get things started, I'm just adding a lot of water to colors I already had on my paint palette, and I'm going to create a light wash of color in my background to get things going. I'm also going to use this first very light layer of color as an opportunity to experiment with salt. I'm going to add both fine-grained salt and coarse-grained salt to my paper. And I'm adding quite a bit of water on the paper. So I'm going to try to add the salt at different times and start by adding it in locations where I have quite a bit of water, because I want you to have a chance to see what kind of effects are created or not created depending on the amount of water you have on your paper. First, I'll start by adding some fine-grained salt, and I'm going to add it into the area where there's quite a bit of water pooling on my paper, just to show you what happens. I'm adding a lot of salt in this area, and that means that the water, of course, is gonna capture that salt. It's going to create some effects and some marks, but you'll notice that once the paper dries, it's going to be quite different. I'm also using some coarse grained salt because the effects that we can get using coarse grained salt are much different than the effects that we can get using some fine grained salt. And I want to be able to show you what those different types of marks are. Now I'm working here with some Strathmore watercolor paper. It's a pretty good quality paper, but it's not my highest quality paper. I do usually get some pretty interesting marks using the salt on this paper, maybe more so than I would on a lesser quality paper, but I don't find that I get the same kind of interesting marks as I would normally get if I was using, say, Arches watercolor paper. So here my paper is a little bit on the drier side. It's still damp and maybe even wet, but it's not nearly as wet as it is in the middle. And I'm coming back with my fine-grained salt, and I'm adding a few little sprinkles of the fine-grained salt in these areas of the painting, or of the background, I should say. Once I'm finished adding the salt, I'll step away from my painting process for a little bit, and I'll let the paper dry naturally before moving on to the next step. The paper is now dry, and I've made the time to brush off the salt that was on the paper. When salt is added over areas with lots of water, it tends to be harder to remove once the paper is dry, but it does leave some interesting marks. I also like the marks left by the coarse-grained salt. They're a little bit more distinct and definitely have something interesting to add to a piece. And then finally, using fine-grained salt over damp areas can really create some nice areas of marks as well, because it tends to repel the paint in a much different way. I've used my pencil to draw in some very light guidelines for myself, and now I'm going to start building my color intensity by using light washes of color. My painting process is one that often is about creating very many layers of color. And it's a process that requires time, and it also requires some patience, because oftentimes I need to step away to let a layer dry so that I can come back and work on it later and not muddy up my colors or change my colors in a way that I don't intend to. I find that when I let my painting dry naturally rather than pull out my heat tool to help it dry faster, the effects tend to be also better. Maybe this is just my imagination, but there does seem to be a difference between when I let the paint dry naturally and when I force it to dry faster using my heat tool, especially when it comes to adding the salt. And so I like to be able to work on a painting for a while and then step away from it. Now, when I do this, sometimes I also run into the issue that when I come back to the painting, I'm not feeling quite the same way I was feeling when I left the painting. And so sometimes this helps me because it helps me shift in a different direction that I like better. Sometimes it takes me a little bit more time to get back into the groove of things. So it can be a bit of a double-edged sword to have to walk away from the painting to a certain extent. And quite honestly, when I feel like I'm just in a really good flow and things are progressing the way I'm enjoying them to be progressing, then sometimes I will pull out my heat tool and speed things up, if you will. But overall, it is especially important to allow time for drying in between layers. Whether I do it naturally or speed things along with my hairdryer or a heat tool, there is something to be said about letting the layers dry in between. And so you'll notice that here I'm building up my colors over what was already applied. When I'm doing this, I'm also trying to make sure that I'm not scrubbing my brush very hard on the paper, because I don't want to lift what's already underneath the current layer I'm adding paint to. And this will help me preserve some of the marks that were left by the salt. It will also help me preserve some of the colors that are underneath. And so it's like applying a fine glaze or a very light wash of color over what's already there and helping to blend the two without actually fully blending them, if that makes sense. I hope that makes sense. So yes, time, patience, and just allowing things to happen. It's all part of the creative process. And when I can make that time to allow, I also make time for myself to slow down and create more zen in my life. Having worked to a point where I'm happy with what I've created in the background using my watercolors, I'm now ready to pull out my pens and start adding some marks to make the painting more interesting. I'm going to use my fountain pen to create some rock-like shapes, and I'm also going to work with my fine tip pen. I have my brush pen sort of waiting on the side in case I feel like pulling it out, but I think I'll probably mostly be working with my fountain pen and my fine tip black pen. Creating this type of artwork is very simple, and because it's so simple, it tends to be very mindful and very relaxing, and that's one of the things I really love about creating artwork like this. I don't have to overthink anything because everything can flow very easily. I also really do my best to not get too attached to an outcome, and I do this for most of my paintings. When I work in this way, it is much more relaxing because I release the pressure of having to create something specific. And even though I know in my mind I want to create a geologic abstract, because I'm not too attached to the outcome, I give my painting room for anything that might come up to me intuitively. And that means my painting can change as the process continues to move along. And for me, this is the best way to create. I enjoy working this way, and especially when I'm tired and there's a lot going on, the more simple I can keep the process, the better it is overall. Keeping the composition simple makes the process more relaxing. Also, using techniques and marks that are repetitive and also very simple can add to making the process even more relaxing. And so when I'm creating this way, especially it's almost like the whole purpose of me creating in this way is for me to find that moment of Zen, to bring more mindfulness to my present moment, We live in a world where we're constantly being pulled in different directions and asked to do multiple things almost at once. And at one time, I think it was believed that multitasking was, the ultimate in skills, when in all reality, it's been proven that multitasking is not actually fully possible, especially if we want to create any type of work with good quality. And so slowing things down, being more mindful, and focusing on one type of skill rather than trying to accomplish multiple things all at once can not only be healthier, it can in turn be better, because we create better work when we work this way. That's my belief anyway. I think when we spread ourselves too thin and try to do too much, for me, it's not surprising that the quality of the work would also go down. So that's sort of my view, I guess, on things. And I'm not looking to create, a masterpiece here. I'm really looking to create for myself, and I'm also creating for my YouTube channel at this point. But I'm making time to slow things down because it's been a very hectic time, and I need time to regenerate, to refuel, and to relax so that I can recharge myself. And when I create this way, using very simple marks, repetitive marks, and using a relatively simple composition, I keep the process very mindful and relaxing for myself. And I hope it can be the same for you, either because you're watching this and you're looking for a little moment of Zen, or because you're watching this in the hopes of being inspired, and that while you're creating your own little painting like this, you might also find some moments of mindfulness and relaxation. Here I forgot to turn my camera on when I added that bronze color that you can see on the painting, and then I added some magic green, and it didn't really seem to sit well with me. I thought, well, I'll take the tape off and see how I feel about it after removing the tape. And I guess I bring all of this up, for one, because you missed some of what I did here, and I guess I could beat myself up over the idea that I didn't do a good enough job of recording this to show you. Or the other thing I could do is just offer myself some self-compassion and hope that you can do the same thing when you are creating. Because ultimately, if we are very hard on ourselves when we're doing anything, it can make the process more stressful for sure, and it can also steal some of the joy of the creative process. It might help you do something better, maybe, but I think if the whole point of a process like this is for you to create some moments of mindfulness and relaxation and joy and creativity, then not being self-compassionate probably would be a deterrent to all that. So I simply decided that I was going to be okay with the fact that I missed recording part of that. I'm also choosing to cover the magic green that I had initially put on the painting because it just wasn't speaking to me. It kind of felt like it didn't fit. I did, however, want to add this sort of sparkling white, and I know there's a color name for it. I'll look it up and add it. It is a shimmery white. I wanted to add it because I do feel like there are some great mid-tone values in here and some nice dark values, but there were light values missing in the painting, and so I wanted to add those. As I'm adding this crystal silver, I'm definitely feeling it more than I was the magic green. There is a slight amount of the magic green still in the background because I had splattered a little bit of it, and I'm not minding that too much, so I'll leave it. But I think this crystal silver is definitely better overall. So I'll add a few little splatters of that, and then I'll be ready to call my painting done. And here it is, fully completed. My little Zen Geologic abstract is complete, and I'm happy I was able to find time to paint. I'm happy I was able to choose a way of painting that for me is more mindful and much more relaxing, because at this time that's exactly what I need. And I hope that it could bring a little bit of Zen and relaxation into your life as well. I think most of us can use a little of that. Most of all, a little process like this is also for me a good reminder of being self-compassionate. And I hope that you can offer yourself self-compassion in whatever it is that you do on a daily basis. Just a little bit of self-compassion can go a long way. As always, I want to send you a great big thank you for making the time to join me on my creative journey this week. I hope it was inspirational and fun for you to watch. I also hope you have a wonderful week and wish you many hours of happy creating.